so
Yeah.
who's taking their clothes off first?
You. By the way, I want to say that reel was awesome. You did a fantastic job. That was really cool.
Well, this has been a reunion that's been kind of 30 years in the making. Should we talk about that first, or just jump right into it?
Yeah. When I was 19 years old, I was a production assistant on a low-budget horror film called Street Trash in Queens, something like that. And my job was to go to local restaurants and try to find good deals for food for the crew. So we do different restaurants, like a different restaurant for each day of the week. So I saw this deli called Timpone's Deli. Am I getting this in my memory?
Tony's Deli Delight.
Tony's Deli Delight, okay. That was his memory, aging here. But, so I go in and I meet the gentleman behind the counter, and I said, look, I'm with a movie company and I'm trying to get food deals for the crew. And he said, oh, you have to talk to my son. And then 19-year-old you, probably, came out. And he had just written an article for Fangoria Starlog, one of those magazines, where he interviewed Anthony Daniels, who played C-3PO. And I was like, you met Anthony Daniels, who played C-3PO? That's amazing. And so we worked out and negotiated to get deli goods, and that was how we first met.
And the legend is that you got fired from Street Trash?
I did. I was late picking up the producer too many times. Second time I was late, he fired me and I was in tears. And then I was hired back to do some sound recording, so I felt like I wasn't completely cut out of it.
But career-wise, you kind of had the last laugh.
I do. Well, so did the director. The director of Street Trash is a Steadicam operator by the name of Jimmy Muro, who went on to shoot Titanic, Dances with Wolves, and including the fight scene between Wolverine and Lady Deathstrike in X-Men 2. So he worked for me, ultimately. No, he's a very talented man.
Could you talk a little about your childhood in New Jersey, making your own Super 8 films?
Yeah, I grew up in suburbs of New Jersey, central Jersey. Wow. Who knew, in Montreal. I first did photography when I was very young. I had a dark room when I was 11, and I had a 35mm camera. And eventually when I was 13, at a friend's house, we made a movie called The Star Trek Murders. And we had costumes, and blood was made from ketchup. And that got my interest. And then back then we would shoot regular 8mm, not even Super 8. Then eventually we would shoot like a Super 8. And I've just been making films ever since I was 13 years old. And when I was about 16, I decided it's what I wanted to do for a living.
Also, didn't you see Steven Spielberg giving an interview on TV that
Yeah.
kind of inspired you to be a director?
Yeah, I'd seen the movie E.T. and it blew me away. And then they interviewed Steven Spielberg on the TV show 2020. And I thought, wow, if this nerdy, Jewish, terrible student can become that kind of filmmaker, I should try to do that. And because I couldn't do anything else, I was a terrible student. Terrible. Bear with me.
How did your first film, Public Access, come about?
In my last semester of college, I made a short film called Lion's Den with Ethan Hawke, who had acted in some of my 8mm movies because he happened to grow up in my neighborhood. It's weird. So then, that movie was a short film. It was a 25-minute film about us. We were all characters in it, and it was just about me and my friends. And that movie, I set up a screening with 3 friends at, it's a long story. Anyway, we put together a screening of 3 short films, of which mine was one, and had director Sam Raimi host it as a favor, because I knew his brother Ted through my friends in college. So Sam actually did this. He didn't know me. I did this as a favor. He had done the movie Dark Men. It was like Evil Dead and Dark Men. That's where he was at. And that was seen by a representative from a Japanese financing company that had this weird program called Cinema Beam. And the idea was to grant money to directors around the world to make these little $250,000 movies. So they gave it to me. So I made it Public Access, which won the Sundance Film Festival in 1993. help.
And the reviews and the awards at Sundance led to, of course, Usual Suspects. You certainly had a lot of credit at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And there you are working with this amazing cast of actors, Gabriel Byrne, Benicio del Toro, Kevin Spacey, of course, who won the Oscar. What was your first day like on the set of that movie?
I don't remember. I was very young, and I looked uniquely young at that time. I just looked young at that time. Not only was I one of the youngest people on the set, but I also looked unusually. So I looked like a production assistant, and so that already is, so I grew facial hair. So through the whole period, I had a goatee to make me look, more commanding. But the actors are great, and Kevin Spacey had become a friend before I started shooting, and Kevin worked the entire movie because he's in the interrogation as well as the flashbacks. So that was good to have the star of the movie and such a respected actor, even though he wasn't as big or famous, he was in theater very respected. It was great to have him as an ally and made the process a lot better.
Could you talk a little about the scripting process on Usual Suspects and all the twists and turns?
Yeah.
Was it hard to keep track of everything?
Well, no. It went through about 9 drafts over 6 months with Chris. The idea essentially was 5 felons who would meet in a lineup and go off in an odyssey of crime. Chris had the idea for the ending a little into the process, and he phoned me up. I was in New Jersey, and he said, "Bryan, I think it should be this ending," which I won't spoil if people haven't seen it. And I thought, oh, now that's interesting. Oh wow, now suddenly the movie's like not just a crime movie. It's it's something new and special that I have never seen before. So. We wanted to make sure the script was really right and tight, so this is the most I've ever worked on a script before shooting. Usually you work on it a lot, and then it's not the longest, but it was intensive.
With the success of Usual Suspects and the 2 Oscars, there were a lot of big projects circling you.
Yeah.
Devil's Own, The
Yeah.
Truman Show, and you chose a film that was pretty damn dark, Apt Pupil, which was probably the most non-commercial movie.
Yeah.
Could you talk about what attracted you to that project?
I read the book Apt Pupil. It's a novella from the book Different Seasons by Stephen King when I was a boy, and like 16 years old, 17 years old. And I loved the story, and I wanted something that I could control and that I could do that would be more intimate. I was afraid of throwing myself into a big studio picture, because I had the wisdom even at that age to know that could be the beginning and the end of your career. I was offered the movie The Devil's Own, starring, and the actor, the star of the movie, took me out. Well, first they offered it to me and I passed. And then the star of the movie, Brad Pitt, took me out to lunch. So I'm sitting with Brad Pitt and he's saying, "Please do this." And I said, "I can't because I don't understand the material, I don't connect to it." And then they called me up and said that Harrison Ford was going to be in it. And I was like, oh my God. And they'd probably offer me like millions of dollars, like a lot of money, because they needed a director for this very small window of time. And I called, that was one of the rare moments where I actually called my agent for advice. And I said, "Hey, do you think I should do, this movie with all these stars and all this?" And he says, "Do you like the script?" And I said, "No." And he goes, "Then don't do it." And that was it. So I made Apt Pupil, which was not particularly successful, but I did well. It's weird. I actually did well financially off it. I actually made a good amount of money. And what that did was that I don't spend a lot of money. I was very cheap, or not cheap, but I just didn't take a lot for me to live. I was renting a room in a little house. So I basically saved that money, and that gave me the confidence to do what I wanted to do next, which was X-Men. I signed the deal to do X-Men 1 before I even made Apt Pupil, back in 1996. And that movie was the hardest movie to get made, and it collapsed multiple times, one time in particular, and I stuck with it. So the money I made off Apt Pupil gave me the freedom to stick with it for a year and a half or more until it got made. Because there were no comic book movies then, so nobody saw the value until it came out.